"Look at him," an old woman whispered, her voice raspy, like dry leaves skittering across the ground.
"He has the eyes of his grandfather, so full of wisdom."
The bundle in his mother's arms stirred. A tiny wrinkled face, framed by a sprinkle of white hair, squinted in the bright afternoon sun. He didn't cry with the lusty wail of a newborn. It was a tired, wheezing sound, like an old man waking from a long sleep. This was the naming ceremony for little Jabari. He was 1 day old. From the edge of the crowd, another young man watched, his own hands, gnarled and weathered, trembling slightly. His name was Femi, and though his back ached and his face was a map of deep lines, he was only 16 years old. He looked at the newborn, Jabari, then at his own reflection in a calabash of water. He saw the face of a 60-year-old staring back. A question burned in his mind, a question he had been too scared to ask for years. Were they truly living, or were they just dying slowly? From the moment they were born, was there ever a time in this village when a child's laughter wasn't a cough? When a baby's first steps weren't the slow, painful shuffle of the elderly? Femi lived in Ayagun, the village of sorrows. It was a quiet place, nestled in a valley and surrounded by a forest so thick and green it seemed to swallow the sun. The air was always still, heavy with a silence that was broken only by the chirping of birds and the gentle rustle of leaves. There were no sounds of children playing, no shouts of joy, no youthful screams. In Ayagun, children were born old, their bodies burdened with the years they had not yet lived. They grew younger in a way, their minds catching up with their aged bodies, but their lives were short. By the time they reached their 30s, they were ancient, their bodies giving up, and they would die. The village huts were built low to the ground, with wide doorways to accommodate the stooped backs of its people. The fruit trees were a special kind, bred to grow their branches downwards, so even the 5-year-olds with their stiff old joints could reach for a mango. The heart of the village, and the source of all their troubles, according to legend, was the river. They called it Omiaro, the river of sorrow. Its water was clear and cool, and it gave life to their crops. But the elders said it also carried a curse. They said that generations ago a selfish queen had angered the river spirit, and in her rage the spirit had cursed all the children of Ayagun, stealing their youth before they could even taste it. This was the story they were told. This was the story they were expected to accept. A few weeks after Jabari's birth, Femi's own mother, Adama, went into labor. Femi paced outside their hut, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He prayed to ancestors he wasn't sure he believed in. "Please," he whispered to the silent trees, "not this time. Let this one be different." But when the midwife came out, her face was a mask of pity. Femi pushed past her. On the mat, cradled in his mother's arms, was a tiny baby girl. Her skin was as wrinkled as a dried prune, and her cry was a frail, breathless whimper. Adama looked at her daughter, her eyes filled with a love so deep it was painful. "Her name is Amara," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. Femi looked at his new sister, at her ancient face and weary eyes, and something inside him snapped. He saw her whole life flash before his eyes. A few years of pained learning, a short decade of tired maturity, and then the slow, inevitable decline. He would not, could not accept this fate for her. He had to find an answer. He had to break the curse. His quest for truth began with the oldest person in the village, Iya Funke. She was only 35, but she lay on her deathbed, her body as frail as a leaf in the dry season. Femi sat by her side, day after day, listening to her faint, rambling stories. "Things were not always this way," she rasped one afternoon, her breath smelling of dust and decay. "My grandmother's grandmother. She spoke of a time of youth." Her eyes, cloudy with age and sickness, flickered with a distant memory. She spoke of the whispering caves beyond the forbidden forest. She said the answers were hidden there. The forbidden forest was a place no one in Ayagun dared to enter. It was said to be protected by spirits who would steal the breath of any who trespassed. But Femi's fear was now smaller than his determination. When he spoke of his plan to the village elder, Baba Eko, the old man's face hardened. Baba Eko was the keeper of their traditions, a man who believed their suffering was a divine punishment that had to be borne with quiet dignity. "You are a foolish boy, Femi," Baba Eko said, his voice cold. "You seek to unravel the will of the gods. This curse is our identity. It is what makes us who we are. Do not go looking for more sorrow. There are dangers in that forest you cannot imagine. Femi's best friend, Kwame, also tried to stop him. Kwame was 17, his face already deeply lined, his spirit more accepting of their fate. "Femi, why can't you just accept it?" he pleaded. "This is our life. It's all we've ever known. What if you go into that forest and never return? What if the answers you find only bring more pain?" But Femi could not be swayed. While the village slept, he gathered a small bag of dried meat, a gourd of clean water, and the sharpest machete he could find. With one last look at his sleeping sister Amara, he slipped out of his hut and disappeared into the menacing darkness of the forbidden forest. The forest was unlike anything he had ever imagined. It was a world of its own, alive and breathing. Strange, luminous fungi cast an eerie glow on the path, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and unknown blossoms. The sounds were what unnerved him the most. The rustling of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, the mournful hoots of owls, and a low, almost inaudible hum that seemed to vibrate through the very ground he walked on. For 2 days he traveled, guided only by Iafunke's dying words and the strange pull in his gut. He fought off swarms of stinging insects, navigated treacherous ravines, and drank from streams that tasted of strange minerals. His old body ached with a pain he had never known, but the image of Amara's wrinkled face pushed him forward. Finally, on the 3rd day, he found it. Tucked behind a curtain of thick, hanging vines was the entrance to a cave. It was just as Iafunke had described. A cool breeze carrying a soft, whispering sound emanated from its mouth. The whispering caves. With his heart pounding, Femi lit a torch he had prepared and stepped inside. The whispers grew louder, echoing off the damp rock walls. But they were not the voices of spirits. It was the wind, whistling through a network of narrow tunnels. The walls of the main cavern were not bare. They were covered in ancient carvings, telling a story that stretched back centuries. Femi moved his torch along the wall, his eyes wide with disbelief. He saw his ancestors, but they were not cursed. The carvings showed them as young, vibrant people. He saw children running, their bodies smooth and strong. He saw teenagers laughing, their faces unlined by premature age. Then, the story on the wall changed. It showed his ancestors discovering a strange plant that grew by the riverbank, a plant with glowing silvery roots. The next carving showed them grinding these roots into a fine powder and mixing it into their main water source, the river. The final set of carvings was the most chilling. It showed the people celebrating, holding up their newborn children. But the babies were drawn with the wrinkled, aged faces he knew all too well. The truth hit Femi with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a curse. It was never a curse. It was the plant. The silvery roots they believed had brought them wisdom and made them special were actually a poison, a substance that caused their bodies to age at an unnatural speed. A spirit did not curse the river of sorrow. They had been poisoning it themselves for generations. So you see now? Femi spun around. Standing at the entrance of the cave, his silhouette framed by the daylight, was Baba Eko. He wasn't angry. His face was filled with a deep, weary sadness. "You followed me," Femi breathed. "I knew you would not listen," Baba Eko said, walking slowly into the cave. "I had to see if you would find it." "You knew?" Femi's voice cracked. "You knew the truth all along?" The elder nodded, his eyes fixed on the carvings. "My father showed me these carvings when I was a young man, just as his father showed him. A small circle of elders has known the secret for a very long time." "But why?" Femi demanded, his voice echoing in the vast cavern. "Why would you let us live like this? Why would you let babies be born only to suffer?" "Fear, my boy," Baba Eko said, his voice barely a whisper. "We were afraid. The lie began as a way to explain the unexplainable, but it grew. It became our tradition, our story. We feared that if the truth came out, our world would crumble. We would no longer be the special, cursed people of Ayegun. We would just be a poisoned village. We feared the outside world would destroy us or shun us. The lie, it kept us safe. It kept us together." A deep tremor ran through the cave, shaking dust from the ceiling. It was as if the ancient rock itself could not bear the weight of the confession. "Safe?" Femi looked at his own gnarled hands. "You call this safe? It is a cage, a prison made of lies." He walked past the elder, his resolve hardened into steel. "I am not afraid." Femi returned to Ayegun, not with a magical flower or a negotiated peace with the gods, but with something far more powerful, the truth. He carried a large flat stone on which he had painstakingly copied some of the key carvings from the cave. He strode to the center of the village and sounded the ceremonial drum, a call that was only used for the most urgent matters. The people of Ayegun gathered, their old young faces etched with confusion and concern. Baba Eko stood at the edge of the crowd, his face unreadable. With a clear, steady voice, Femi told them everything. He spoke of the forbidden forest, the whispering caves, and the story carved into the rock. He pointed to the drawings and the stone he carried, explaining how their ancestors had mistaken a poison for a gift. He told them there was no curse. A wave of shock rippled through the crowd. There was denial, then murmuring which grew into anger. People looked at their own frail bodies, at the tired faces of their children, and saw not the will of the gods but generations of a devastating mystique. They saw a lie. Then, a single figure pushed through the crowd. It was Femi's mother, Adama. She walked up to her son, her eyes searching his. She looked at the stone, then back at his face. She reached out a trembling hand and touched his wrinkled cheek, but her gaze was different. For the first time, she wasn't just seeing her old son. She was seeing her brave 16-year-old boy. "My son," she said, her voice clear and strong for all to hear. "I believe you." Her words broke the spell of denial. One by one, other villagers stepped forward, their anger melting into a fragile, rising hope. The choice was made. Led by Femi, the villagers abandoned the Omiyaro, the river of sorrow. He showed them the new, clean spring he had found deep within the forest during his journey. It was hard work. They had to carve a new path and create a system to carry the water back to the village. But they worked together, their movements fueled by a purpose they hadn't felt in centuries. The change wasn't a miracle. The people of Femi's generation and even little Amaras would still live out their shortened, aged lives. The poison was too deep in their bones. But the lie was broken. The fear was gone. Years passed. Femi grew into a true old man, his body finally catching up to the appearance it had always had. But his spirit remained young, a beacon of hope for his people. Baba Iko, stripped of his authority but humbled by the truth, lived out his final years in quiet solitude, watching the village he had tried to control finally begin to heal. One morning, a new sound echoed through the village of Ayagun. It wasn't the wheezing cry of a cursed newborn. It was a loud, healthy, powerful wail. In a hut filled with villagers holding their breath, a young woman had given birth. Femi, his back now permanently stooped, his hair as white as snow, entered the hut. The mother, with tears of joy streaming down her face, held up her baby. The child's skin was smooth, pink, and perfect. It kicked its chubby legs and waved its tiny unwrinkled fists in the air. Femi reached out and gently touched the baby's cheek. He looked over at his sister Amara. She was now a young woman of 10 years old. Her steps were still a little slow, but her eyes were bright with a future her ancestors could only have dreamed of. A genuine, unrestrained laugh bubbled up from her chest, a sound as clear and pure as the water from the new spring. The village of Ayagun was no longer the place where children were born old and died young. It was now, and forever would be, the village where life had begun anew.